I'm so happy to be back. First of all, before we even get going, I need to call attention to that little guy. Do you see what that is? That is a crystallized book. It is a crystal copy of The Hunger Games. Let me know if you want to see it closer up. Okay? Awesome. I'm Emily. Welcome to my channel. I am so happy you are here. If you're here for the first time, hello! I am a professional psychic with over 10 years of experience. I'm a historical medium, meaning I channel in people from the ancient past. I'm an author. I talk about books, writing, magic, all the stuff. If it's not your first time here, hello and welcome. You know the drill. You are here for this adventure as well. And today we're talking about something that I'm really super duper passionate about, and it's very synchronistic. So the reason I say I'm excited to be back is I just got back from Greece. Like last week, couple days ago, I got back from Greece. I hosted an incredible group trip with 21 beautiful, amazing souls, me and my business partner, Krista. I'm not even gonna mince words. It was one of the most impactful and incredible experiences of my entire life. I am so unbelievably glad that I get to host experiences like this and I get to connect with people in this way. It blows my mind. It genuinely just baffles me that this is a thing that I get to do in the world. What we did in this Greece trip, I just want to touch on really quickly because I hope it inspires some of you to travel more, to connect with like-minded people more. If you want to come on a group trip with me, I got more coming up. More are going to be announced very shortly for next year. Already in August, I'm going to Ireland with a group. So if you're on that trip, drop in and say hi. I'm also going to Egypt with a group in March, and there's going to be probably one or two more for next year as well. So keep an eye out on that. But honestly, it was so wonderful. One of the biggest takeaways I had of the entire experience was just getting to be truly with people who were getting to be themselves out loud for sometimes even the first time, where they, you know, the people in their lives weren't necessarily super supportive of their spirituality or wasn't something they could really talk about, and being in this ancient, very sacred place and getting to do that together in a very safe container was honestly magical and incredibly transformational. I also spent almost the entire trip talking to deities. That's basically what we did the whole trip. Whether it was me talking to different deities, and I have a whole bunch of different experiences that happened during the trip that I'm most likely going to make separate videos on, either here or on like TikTok or other platforms, depending upon the length of the story time, because I do really want to share all about it with you all and all about the different ahas and things that I had personally. Or it was me channeling in and offering people like, hey, this deity wants to reach out and work with you, or this deity thinks you should focus on them while walking through the Acropolis, and having their experiences mirror and connect with each other. Like, there's nothing cooler than that, in my opinion. It was just so incredible and so connective, and they all got to leave with a sense of how to communicate and work with deities, and that's also what I want to impart to you today. So that's what we're talking about. This video is going to be all about how to communicate with deities, how to identify what deities are trying to communicate with you, all of that jazz. We're going to go kind of deep, but it's still going to be kind of a beginner's how to get going on that. If you want more information, I'm just going to preface it right now. By all means, let me know, and I can do like a part 2 video almost, or like a level 2. I'm gonna go with level 2 video on how to communicate or how to do deity communication, because there's so many different things that can go into this practice that I think it's important that if you want more information, let me know. But this is going to get you going. This is the video for that. Of course, before we get into that, please don't forget, please like this video. It means a lot to me. If you could subscribe to my channel, if you enjoy the type of topics that we have here. Obviously, I talk kind of on a wide array of things, but really focused on like creativity and spirituality and, you know, channeling in lost histories. If those things appeal to you, if you would like to subscribe to my channel, I'd be really appreciative. Thank you so much. It is so fun for me to get to do this. I've broken 1,000 subscribers, which is incredibly cool. Thank you. It's super duper neat. It's definitely something that I feel really honored to get to do as well. So thank you for being here. But yeah, if you want to hit subscribe and then hit the little notification bell so you know when my videos come out, that would be super cool too. So you never miss an installment of me and this channel. Also, this topic was voted on by my patrons in my Patreon, and I know that a lot of you have heard me talk about Patreon before, but I just want to talk a little bit more about it because I love the community that's being created there so much. Everyone is collaborative, and I'm actually currently expanding a lot of my offerings in the Patreon. So my Patreon really focuses on psychic mentorship. It is the place to get mentored by me. If you've ever had a reading with me before, you know kind of my style. I'm a lot of like how you can tune into your psychic abilities, how you can activate yourself, how you can pull and release your blocks. All of that sort of stuff is really what I deal in. And with dealing in that, I always want to teach you how to fish, basically. And this is one of the best ways to get one-on-one mentorship kind of experience with me is in the Patreon group. It's also a place where you get like a monthly meditation, you get monthly guidance, card pulls, bonus videos, all of this stuff. And like I said, I am expanding it. I'm adding like a group feature where it's going to be kind of like a Discord almost. I'm not in Discord because I'm Discord challenged, but like kind of a different group for my intuitive initiate tier. Also, I'm looking at adding some perhaps merch options and a couple other options for kind of all the tiers or some of the tiers. So if you are interested in being in this community, if you're interested in genuinely just trying to expand your psychic abilities, if you want to foster that group of spiritual friends and get a lot of feedback on the magical stuff that goes on in your life, Patreon is the place to go. So I would absolutely love to have you in that space. Side note on that as well. Like I said, I do post a monthly meditation for my Patreon group. This monthly's meditation is a meditation to connect with your deities. Go figure. It kind of goes hand in hand with this video. So if at the end of this video, you're like, wow, I would really like someone to kind of hold my hand to usher a deity in to talk to me. That is what the meditation's for. It's just going to help you get a lot out of it. It's very repeatable, but that is in the Patreon as well. If you feel so drawn, of course, all of the information is linked down below. Let's get going. A little bit of background on my history working with deities, because they actually have a pretty extensive history in this particular topic. When I was first going through not even quite yet my spiritual awakening, or reawakening rather, in, my late teens, kind of early 20s, I was in a really abusive relationship. And at the time, reading was one of my major escapes. Go figure. Still love it. But I was reading a book kind of about the Greek gods and kind of like a modernized Greek god situation. And they wouldn't leave me alone. And when I say they wouldn't leave me alone, it was like the second I cracked open that book and started reading that, I was seeing like Zeus Plumbing Company or Apollo Plumbing Company on everything, or images, or the like, at the time it was like Facebook, maybe. I think I had just barely gotten a Facebook. I'm dating myself. MySpace was a thing at this time, basically. And something would pop up about the deities, or all of a sudden an article would pop up, or I'd see something about the fact that they just discovered some ancient statue or something like that. And I was a little bit baffled because I had not been super into that circle before, but ever since reading that book, it was like literally the gods were just like tapping on me, and who am I to not listen? So basically, after I got out of that abusive relationship, which those deities were kind of a gateway in helping me get out of it in a lot of ways, I really started to reach out and try to figure out, okay, if these deities seem like they keep popping up, maybe they're trying to communicate with me. Maybe that's actually something I can lean in on. So during my spiritual reawakening process, where I really dove in and released a lot of blocks and figured out how to activate my psychic abilities a whole ton, a direct mirror to that journey was my journey in Hellenismos, or Hellenic polytheism, which is the modern revival of the ancient Hellas religion, which is essentially the ancient Greeks' religious structure and religious practices revived for the modern day. There is revivals of almost every ancient belief system at this point, or every ancient pantheon at this point. Some of the information out there is more true to the ancient stuff. Some of it is a lot more interpreted, but at the time, I read so many different books and dove so deeply and headlong into Hellenic polytheism that it's still something that carries through to me today, because it does feel very much a rooted thing for me. It's super important to me, and that's really where I got my start with like deity connection and deity worship and deity work. This is just a really quick aside if you're really interested in Hellenic polytheism or Hellenismos. First off, one of the books I highly recommend is actually Mythos by Stephen Fry. I don't have that one on hand. It's an audiobook that I listen to. It's lovely. It is a really modern retelling of the Greek myths. It reminds me how it would feel to like sit around the fire and listen to Homer tell stories, like Homer the poet, the Odyssey. That's how it would feel, because it's very much that flavor. It gives the gods a lot of their very accurate personality traits, and a lot of really cool just sort of energy goes into that work. So I highly, highly recommend that. The other thing, these are books that I used back during my Hellenic polytheism days. Classic mythology. This one is hefty, but I annotated the living crap out of it. It's a really good one, but again, it's going to be harder to get through than Mythos. So if you want kind of a basic of like God's personality, or if one specific God is calling out to you, which we're going to touch on in a sec, especially if it's Greek pantheon, mythos, or this one's a great one. If you want a little pared down version of that, Great Zeus and All His Children. Again, annotated to shit. If you can tell, they're really old. I've loved these well. That's a really helpful one too. This one's a bit dated as well, so it is more myth-based and not practice-based. If you're looking for more practice-based stuff, especially in Hellenic polytheism, Charis, this is a really, really cool way that goes down to like all of the ancient rituals kind of modernized and revived. There's a lot of history stuff there. If you want more about Hellenic polytheism beyond this too, just let me know. I have so many resources that can help you with that are especially out there on the web as well. I also have a couple books of hymns, Homeric hymns and Orphic hymns. These are used in astrology and astrological magic as well, which I'm not an astrologer or astrological magician, as well as in Hellenic polytheism. So that is just kind of a fun side note as well. I was getting through this. I wasn't going to recommend like any of this stuff, but as soon as I touched on Hellenic polytheism, my guides were like, yo, you're probably going to want to share those resources, friend. So there's some cool places to start. Anyway, so I did a huge background in Hellenic polytheism. I've always loved ritual because I was raised Catholic, and that was one of my very first associations and connection with anything spiritual was to do a lot of ritual, because that is what Catholicism is. So having kind of a ritual-based practice was really helpful for me on expanding my spiritual abilities, and they have kind of grown from there. If you've been here for any amount of time, you know that one of my main guides, one of my actual spirit guides, is the Greek/Roman god Apollo. I work with him incredibly closely. He is kind of always around. I will say that is a little bit of an exception to the rule. So just to kind of touch base on what deities are to get us going here. So deities, the way that we kind of understand them now, or the way that I understand them now through extensive amounts of channeling, research, and work, deities are essentially beings whose higher selves, their fully actualized selves, took form and walked on planet during a time in the past when the planet's vibration was higher. If you want more information about how the whole world works and the universe works, I did make a video on it. I will put the little taggy bit here for the layered cake of the universe video, which will give you a little bit more context. But essentially they are higher selves that walked on planet in their full form. Sometimes they were just a very large piece of a soul that walked on planet in its form. So they had like less magic-y abilities than some of the other ones. So there's a little bit of like not all hard and fast rule of like, yes, everyone was their complete and full higher self. But for the most part, that's kind of what we're talking about. So I want you immediately, starting right now, to disregard any internalized Christianity you have of the concept of deities, deity worship, how to connect with them, anything like that. Like that needs to get put to the side, because that is not how deity work works. And it is very, very easy, especially if you've been raised in, a very structured religious setting, whether that is Christianity or Islam, or, I mean, you name it, like Judaism. I've seen all sorts of different structures that kind of don't always give the best understanding of how deity practice works. So that's why I'm like, hey, could just pull that out, set that over here, and try to remove any perception that is filtered through the idea of the church, because that is not how it works. It's not how it worked in ancient times. It's not how it works now as far as deity kind of communication goes.
Stupid. Ugly. Out of date. That's just ridiculous.
The other thing to note with deities and what exactly they are, when we work with them, we are talking to that full actualized higher self. It's up a couple layers of the universe cake, and we're working with them. They usually are spiritual embodiments of a archetype here on planet. So they will work with very specific things. Now, deities across pantheons, so a pantheon is a group of gods. Deities across pantheons, some will have very similar attributes to the other ones. They work with very similar things, and that is totally okay. Oftentimes you'll know what deity is reaching out to you purely because you're drawn to that specific one, and even though that one works with lightning and that one works with lightning and that one works with lightning, you know it's this one that's for you because that's what you're drawn to. Sometimes they cross multiple kind of barriers based on the culture they were helping when they did walk on planet. Hopefully that makes sense, but that doesn't mean it has to be something like only one god handles this one thing. They are very archetypal. They do like to help with certain things. They do have certain symbols, and in a lot of ways they are still very connected to their ancient roots. A lot of the writing about them or the information about them out there is still pretty accurate, even though it's from thousands of years ago, because time works very differently for us than it does for them. So if you do feel called to a deity and you do research on it, know that a lot of that research is probably fairly accurate. I'm in the middle of updating my space and I just keep getting so annoyed by like this corner over here. I'm like, you need to be different, but I'm in the middle of it. And this is a good, we're in a happy medium. We're going with it. The other thing about deities that I want you to know before we dive in on how you can work with them, is they can be spirit guides, but just because you work with a deity does not make them your guide. It is a very different kind of relationship. It is a little bit more, working with a deity is think of it a little bit more as like asking Santa to bring you something versus a spirit guide, which is like, yo man, what should I have for lunch? What's your opinion on this topic? Do you have feelings about what I just did? I need some guidance over here. Could you help me work this situation out? And your guide's like, maybe man, I don't know. Or would you like more experience with that? It's a lot more of a conversation friendship, where deity stuff is a lot more like, hey, I'd really like your help with this. You'll probably get communication back too. I'm not saying it's one way, because it's definitely not, but it is more of a, you develop a relationship with them still, but it is a little bit more of a power dynamic where your guides are not. Your guides and you are on equal footing. Deity is not quite the same. Just because they are someone's spirit guide doesn't make that better or worse. If you want to work with them, they will still help you. They will still honor requests, anything like that. Just some different energies and spirits and entities out there have different soul pacts or soul contracts or soul bonds to work together on planet in different ways. So don't get in your head about that. So how do you start deity work? Now that we understand kind of what a deity is historically and modernly, how exactly do you start working with deities? This is actually a really fabulous question, because it can feel kind of like jumping off the deep end into like, I don't know, I just kind of pick one? Do I just pick one? And the answer is kind of like, yeah, sometimes you do. First and foremost, if you feel very drawn to the mythology, the story, or simply the entity of a specific deity, then by all means, start your deity worship there. If you're feeling really called to work with a specific deity, who am I to say that's not the right one? You're probably feeling really called to work with that specific deity because you're being called to work with that specific deity. And that's totally fine. It can feel a little arbitrary because you're like, I don't know, why am I getting called for that? Well, Apollo Plumbing made me feel called, so why could your signs mean anything different? It's totally an individual experience in that way. Also, if you really relate to a specific story, a specific mythology about a specific deity, that is also a really wonderful place to start. For example, Medusa often connects and works with a lot of people who have experienced sexual assault, because Medusa experienced sexual assault. So she tends to really like to work with people in that capacity. If you really resonate with her story and that speaks to you, that is a wonderful deity to start working with, because she understands and she's going to beat you there sympathetically. I'm going to talk a lot about the Greek and Roman pantheon purely because that's who I know the best. That doesn't mean I haven't channeled other pantheons. I've done a good amount of work with like the Hinduism pantheon, with the Celtic pantheon, the Nordic pantheon, even like some Native American pantheons, that sort of deal. There's a lot out there. So I'm not saying that you have to be drawn to one of the main ones I talk about. I just talk about them mostly because those are who I'm drawn to, and those are who I've done kind of the most work with. I've also done a lot of like the Germanic pantheons, especially writing Locusta. That was like the culture she was born from. Anyway, besides the point, but this is just the easiest myths I have access to because I know the most about them. So if you hear my examples being Hellenistic, that's why. So yeah, Medusa would be great if you're very sympathetic to that story, and there's a million different stories and myths out there. So that is the first way, is just kind of pick one that you feel aligned with, and that's totally fine. It can evolve over time. If you choose one deity now to work with and you realize actually you don't really want to work with them anymore, or you feel like your relationship with them has closed, you've done enough with them, you can move on to another one. That is okay. They don't have hard feelings about that. That's not something that they usually get in their head about. Usually they're like, oh yeah, our relationship's closed, peace. And I always recommend doing like kind of a ritual that's like, hey, we're going to kind of close this chapter and I'm moving on to this chapter, just for you and your deity to kind of have some closure. That's kind of more in depth on there, but just kind of keep that in mind. Sometimes deities choose you on the flip side. So sometimes there's a deity that won't leave you won't leave you alone. So whether you know a lot about them or maybe you don't, but all of a sudden you can't stop, getting information about Selene, the moon, the goddess of the moon, or the tightness of the moon. She just keeps popping up over and over and over again in a bunch of different capacities. And finally you're like, okay, fine, I will see what I can do. I will reach out to you. I will start working with you because you clearly aren't stop leaving me alone. And if this is what I'm supposed to do, send me a validation or a synchronicity or something to validate this. That is totally fine too, but just know that sometimes they pick you the way you might pick them.
Good afternoon.
So if there is, if you nonstop are seeing owls, maybe you should look at what deities the owl is associated with, or, peacock feathers or panthers. I mean, there's a million different things, but that is something to kind of pay attention to. If you don't know what deity to work with, if you're like, okay, I want to do deity work, I know I'm called to that, it feels aligned for me to do that, or even I just want to try it out and you don't know where to go or where to start, what you're going to want to do first is ask for a deity to claim you, or to who wants to work with you. Be like, hey, I'd like to work with some deity out there. Whoever wants to work with me, could you please show up, please? And then pay attention. You want to pay attention to anything odd that happens. So if all of a sudden, doves keep showing up and they're not usually around, that would be something odd. Makes sense, especially if it's a natural thing, or, some weird weather pops out of nowhere. All of a sudden you can't stop seeing rainbows. Iris is one of the deities I also work with quite a bit. She's the goddess of rainbows. There's a thing there. So maybe that's something, but pay attention to kind of odd things that way, or synchronistic things like my Apollo plumbing story, right? Like if a name keeps popping up somewhere, or someone all of a sudden you see this whole backstory of this deity on a video that pops up on TikTok and you're like, well, that's kind of random. Things like that where they show themselves in that way. That's another thing to kind of pay attention to. Side note, I also kind of work with Hermes. There's a whole backstory there. If you're a longtime follower of the TikTok, you'll know it. If you don't, and you want me to tell the story of how I'm in a play fight with a god, let me know. He bugged me just now, so I needed to share that. Also, ask yourself what pantheon you are drawn to. And I want to just stress this right now. It doesn't have to do anything with your ancestry. This is not something where you're applying your ancestry to it. It might be a factor for you, in which case that's awesome. But that's not what we're talking about or doing here. It is more of what pantheon speaks to me, what pantheon and I'm drawn to, and kind of go from there. And I'm going to touch more about that in a second. But you might be like, oh, well, I have Italian blood, so maybe I have to work with... You don't. You don't have to do that. I, for example, am incredibly Norwegian. My grandparents are off the boat Norwegian, and... that doesn't mean I work a lot with the Norwegian pantheon in the slightest. That's not what we're doing. So I just want to preface that. If you're drawn to a specific pantheon, that's the pantheon that you want to lean into. If all of a sudden you're like, okay, I really like the Japanese, Shintoism style pantheon of all of these different beings, cool. Lean into that. That is totally fine. And we're going to talk a little bit about cultural appropriation in a second, because that's not what I'm encouraging. I'm just simply saying that is a really easy way to start doing some deity work, is to be like, okay, what pantheon am I drawn to? And then start reading stuff about that pantheon, reading some of the myths, and see what speaks to you. Who do you relate with? What myths keep sticking in your head? If you read a bunch of myths or listen to a bunch of myths from a specific pantheon of deities, and one just keeps sticking in your head, that's probably because that deity wants to chat with you. You can also ask to connect with them. If it's getting stuck in your head, be like, yo, do you want to talk to me? I'd like to talk to you. Let's see how this goes. Also, if you notice just random, a bunch of the same symbol keeps popping up, Google search it. What deities are associated with this symbol or this number or this animal? That's going to give you the information of where to kind of go next. Follow what feels most aligned. Follow what you feel most pulled to. If a owl comes up and you really feel pulled, I think Freya's the owl. I'm not getting clarity on that one. I think Freya's an owl, but I also think Athena's an owl. So if you're like, ooh, which one? Oh, I really feel pulled to Freya, then lean in that direction. If that's wrong, I'm sure you'll get information about it, but usually it's not. Feel what goes with feels good. That is kind of the root of almost everything that we do here on this channel, is follow your gut and yourself, because you're magic. Cool. Also, if you want more information to be like, how do I know what feels good? I did do a video on guide communication through what is your strongest Claire sense, which is going to give you a lot of information. I'll put a little thingy for that too, a little clickable zone for that as well too, or just go look back on my channel. It's one of the most popular videos of communicating with your guides based on your strongest Claire, and that will help you understand how you can know what helps you feel the strongest. So once you figure out what deity you would like to work with, what you're going to want to do next is start researching. You want to read myths about them. You want to understand their culture, their deity culture, basically their pantheon and their relationships with the other deities there. And you want to understand the culture that they come from. And here's where we're going to talk about, let's avoid some cultural appropriation stuff. What I want to say is part of the reason you want to do research on the culture where the deity originates from is because that culture will give you a better understanding of the lens through which those myths were written. Because at the end of the day, the myths were written down by men. They just were. And if they were written down by men or cataloged by men or spoken repeatedly by men, then there's going to be a different lens that they come through based on the culture that they're coming out of. Most myths come from an oral tradition in some way. And because they come through an oral tradition, there's a little bit of a game of telephone there, but oftentimes they are very much true to the actual story of what happened with that specific deity. However, the way that it is told is dictated by the culture it is told by. So it is really important for you to do research about the culture in the time period when the myth originated, just so you have an understanding of what lens you might want to be reading it or not reading it through. So that is really important. There is information about so many different myths and deities and all that sort of stuff out there. I will say that doesn't mean that all of the myths and stories for any given deity are available. A lot of them are lost. So if your deity at any point is like, hey, I had this story where I died and was reawakened, and you're like, I cannot find any information on that. It's history. It was written by the victors. Some of it was oral tradition. It was lost. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean the information you're getting is wrong. It just means that it's history. And that's how it works. It's all one big game of telephone that we have to sort through, cipher through. And that's why I do a lot of channeled history stuff, because I find that really important. And getting those stories from people that did live in the ancient past is really important to me. So that is just something to kind of keep in mind. However, you also want to be respectful to the culture in which your deity comes from. Now, what I will say is ancient cultures, ancient Greece, for example, doesn't exist anymore. That culture is gone. There's still some hanging on bits of it, but that culture is gone. The modern day Greek people are not the ancient Greeks. In fact, it was only really recently, I think 2012. I would have to verify that, but I think in 2012 it became legal for Greek people to practice Hellenismos, the revival of the ancient Greek religion, in Greece legally. So that's how new it is for them to actually practice that old religion. So the culture of ancient Greece isn't there anymore. You're not taking anyone's cultural beliefs by doing stuff from ancient peoples. That being said, if you're doing stuff that are indigenous practices, if you're connecting with indigenous gods, those cultures are still around. Those cultures are still here. They're still very much trying to reclaim themselves. They have been very, very belittled, squished, colonized, messed up. I was trying to come up with a better word than belittled, but that's the one that popped in, so we're just rolling with it. But that is where you want to be really sensitive to what is closed practice. If you want to talk to that deity, awesome, but probably the ways that they worship that deity are not going to be the way that you worship that deity, because there's probably closed practices for the people in that culture, and that needs to be respected. This happens also a lot with like Celtic culture. Celtic culture and Nordic culture has been very taken and applied to things that it should not be applied to. Laura O'Brien and Your Irish School, I think is what their website is. They run Your Irish School, or I think Your Irish Connection is their Instagram handle. That is a great resource if you are drawn to the Irish pantheon, just to honor the Irish culture that it comes out of, or the Celtic culture that it comes out of. So it's important to research the cultures once you have an understanding of your deity and when they walked on planet and who was actually talking to them and interacting with them then. Like ancient Egyptians are not modern Egyptians, right? You get what I mean? I can't believe I forgot about the Egyptian pantheon until now. I've worked with them a whole bunch. Anyway, besides the point, there's a lot of gods out there. Also, so you know that you're not culturally taking from a culture that wants you not to take from them, because we don't want to do that. There's a million ways to worship deities, and if there's someone out there that is like, hey, this is my indigenous practice, this is my cultural practice, please don't take it if you're not in the culture. Worship your deity in a different way. Connect with your deity in a different way. So that is my note on cultural appropriation. Obviously, I'm very, very passionate about. So I am also white, though, and I don't have a lot of culture, unfortunately, outside of like mountain town culture and ski culture, because that's what I was raised in. Listen to people of the cultures that you're wanting to work with the deities of, if those cultures are still around, on this topic. It is not for me to dictate. I am not that voice. I am simply using my platform to raise their voices and encourage you to actually seek out source materials that are true to the source and true to the person you're trying to work with. Cool. All right. So now that after I've covered that and touched on cultural appropriation, basically what you're going to want to do is there's a couple different ways you can actually start working with your deity. Once you know what they kind of help with, how they work with you, or how they have worked with people in the past, and like the areas that you can actually beseech them for their help, you want to start kind of asking them for their help. You want to say like, hey, I would like to work with you. Do you have any messages for me? Kind of the same way you would with like a guide. They like certain offerings. You can go off of anything you find in the research. If you don't find anything in the research, Ask them, hey, what would you like me to leave for you as offerings? For a long time, whenever I would cash my paycheck, because I did have to have it in cash, which is a whole other story, I would have change left over. And one of the deities I work with, Fortuna, would ask me to leave the change outside of the casino where I would go to cash my paycheck, which is, again, a whole other story. But that way it would give everyone luck who walked in the door. And that was like kind of my offering to her. And I'd be like, okay, so I would leave the change outside on the sidewalk for the people that would walk into the casino, and I would perpetuate luck, and therefore luck would come back to me and good fortune, etc. That's still something that I do fairly often. If I have change, I will leave some of it out or give it to someone if there's like a homeless person there or something in that capacity, as kind of an offering of moving it forward. You can also do offerings of nature things, make fresh flowers. You can also build altars if that feels called to you. You can also just dedicate a piece of jewelry to a specific deity if that is something that your deity requests. Anything like that. It's kind of a give take. At the end of the day, whatever like deference you show to them or whatever honor or gratitude you show to them, they're going to respect. It's not going to be like, I wanted you to pour me a libation of wine, and instead you left me some beautiful rocks. How dare you? Like, that's not gonna be a thing. But that is a really great way. Once you start putting stuff out there, you're gonna start receiving things back. You can also, again, as I've kind of mentioned a little bit previously, ask your specific deity for a validation that they've received their offering, or that they like the altar you set up for them, or, you know, if the help that you've asked for is coming, etc. Deity work is a little bit more of a give, take. That's a fun little validation sound. It's more of a give, take sort of situation. So it's a little bit more of a back and forth. So lean into it. It doesn't have to be a massive thing. When in doubt, they love songs, they love food, and they love nature stuff. So if you're kind of in doubt, that's why those hymn books I showed you earlier, they're literally hymns. You sing them, or you read them. And they are hymns to the gods. They themselves, the words are offering, because words have magic. Recently, when we were in Greece, we found this little cave, and I could tell that there was some serious kind of like nature spirit in the cave. So I just poured a little water in front of the cave to be like, thank you for being here. I just want to honor your space. That can be as simple as it is. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. You can also do some things to replicate some of the ancient holidays in a modern way. There's, again, pulling off of my Hellenic polytheist background, there's a couple holidays where you would stay up all night. So once a year I would stay up all night and I would draw different deities and I would be really creative and I would eat food usually flavored with honey in some way, because that was a very sacred food to the deities, and just kind of honor that space and that transformation. That is something you absolutely can do. So that is also something that you were going to pull up from research. Or anything that feels aligned with you. If you want to draw them, and while you're drawing with them, kind of draw them, and while you're drawing them, kind of channel in and connect with them, that is perfectly fine. That's a wonderful way to show reverence. If you'd like them to send you dreams to communicate with them, ask for those sorts of things. It is a very wide open game. There's not a whole lot of rules outside of be thankful, and then of course don't ever invite anything to like live in your physical body or into your spiritual space in that kind of way, which I have touched on in other videos about like keeping your energy safe, etc. One thing I always want to say though, make sure that you always thank them for the help that they give. That is very, very important. We like to show gratitude. Gratitude is great. And it is perfectly reasonable for your relationship with whatever deity you're working with to grow. Also, if you think a deity is reaching out to you and you still seriously cannot figure out who they are, you can ask them to identify themselves or just give them a nickname until they do. That's fine. Like, that's fine. Oftentimes there won't be a lot of records of deities, but they have very same signature. So we won't be able to find a lot of information on them, or maybe just like a paragraph or two on Wikipedia. And you're like, well, this is all I got to go off of. Then it's on you to kind of get to know them, and they will kind of explain more about their identity and their stories to you as you sort of go along. One last thing. Another great way to kind of do deity work is to go to places that would be or are sacred to that deity. Now, that could mean like if you actually travel, like we just did to Greece, Apollo led me to his caves. There's a whole story there, and I went to different temples of him, and I also went to this like grove of olive trees and had like a moment of reverence in the Acropolis to be like, hey, thank you for bringing me here, because it's because of that pantheon of deities that I'm here on this screen for you, and that I was in Greece and all these other things. I still get kind of emotional talking about it, but we're going on. We're moving on. So you can do that, but you can also do that in a very local sense too. If you know that there's a pond nearby and you really work closely with a deity that loves natural water, then go there because they really love that energy. If there's a rainbow out, go stand underneath it. If, you know, if it's raining and you're like, oh, awesome, this would be great, we can go there. Or any areas that kind of feel sacred. Sometimes it's buildings and structure, and you name it. Places of like reverence that might feel aligned with your deity, you can also go there. And you can also do a meditation to kind of go to an ancient sacred site and see what holds there for you and bring that back in more of a meditation sense. If you can't travel, that is a perfectly reasonable way to do that. Astral projection, which do it safely, be experienced in that, all of that jazz. I will do a video on that. If you guys would like a video on that, let me know in the comments. But astral projection is another way to kind of go to areas that are sacred to them, or even just make an area in your yard or in an outdoor space that's like near you where you can be like, this is an area that I'm dedicating this little square of ground to you. Every time I come, I will make sure there's no trash on it. I will make sure I clean it up a little bit, and you can have this space. That is perfectly good, and just doing that in the natural world can help you connect with your deities as well. That's kind of the basics. That's some one-on-one. I hope this video was helpful to you and helped you understand kind of deity relationships and how that sort of works. And I hope it really empowers you to go communicate and connect with deities, because genuinely they're awesome. I love doing deity work. It's something I'm really passionate about, and I just want to spread that passion. Of course, let me know if you have any questions in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. If I see them, you know, sometimes comments get overwhelming for me, so I will do my best to get in there. But if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them there. Also, if you again could like, subscribe, hit the little ringy button. I'm so happy to have you here, and I hope you know that you are magical as fuck. Have an amazing day. Mwah!